There was an article that made its way around. I think I got emailed the article 4 times this week. So at least 4 people read it. It was in the Atlantic by Shira Talushkin. Anybody else read that article? How many people saw that article? Yeah, of course. The rabbis in the room all got that article, and a few others. It was a great article, and some of you may be familiar with the last name of the author. She's the daughter of Joseph Talushkin, who was one of the great, especially congregational rabbis, I would say, of the last 50 years, maybe even century. He published a number of books that many of you probably have on your shelves. What I remember him most as was this example of the learned, warm, Hamish rabbi that really the community gathered around, and who trusted in. One of the things he was famous for was really trusting in his congregation, the partnership that he had with them. And so this is his daughter writing this article, and the premise of the article is that Jewish life is thriving in America, just not in synagogues and not with rabbis. And perhaps from her perspective, having grown up looking up at her father, she could be considered an expert in the area. She writes that there's a new center of gravity for American Jewish life emerging, far removed from synagogue life and the institutions that have previously defined it. The centralized Judaism of the 20th century is giving way to a series of independent organizations, reflecting a broader trend across faith communities toward religious individualism. This new Judaism raises questions about what a rabbi should be in the 21st century. I would add what a synagogue should be in the 21st century, whom they should serve, what to do now that so many congregations are having a hard time finding a rabbi. In short, I understand her argument to be that our Jewish community is not what it used to be. We're not the Judaism that she grew up with, that we don't seem to admire our synagogues and our rabbis the way that she remembers her father being admired, and that the synagogue is not the center of the Jewish universe, and that the rabbi is no longer the king or the queen, at least in America. I find her argument a little overstated. I know I'm biased, but I think she goes a little too far. I don't think maybe it's because we're here in Akron, Ohio, and not on the coasts, but I don't get the sense that we're in as dire straits as she's describing. When I look at my rabbinate and the rabbinate of my rabbi, who was a peer of Rabbi Talushkin, I find that a lot has stayed the same. Many people continue to see the synagogue as the center of their Jewish world. The strength of a Jewish community is still defined by the strength of the synagogues and the Jewish community centers. I would say especially in Ohio, let's say, in our neighborhoods, if our cities didn't have synagogues and Jewish community centers, we would perceive that there also weren't Jews there. And so I don't think that we're in this drastically different time, but I also don't think she's entirely wrong. And I don't think that the number of times I was given that email, that article this week, I don't think it was by accident. I think we all find some truth in what she's writing. We're not the synagogue that we used to be. As her article states, the previous generation of rabbis were tasked with teaching Jewish immigrants how to be American, and this generation is tasked with teaching Americans how to be Jewish. And the latter is a lot more difficult. We're a different community than we were 40, 60, 100 years ago. But then again, if we go back through history, this has always been the case. This week, we read a line in our Torah portion, which we will in a moment. It's become famous, especially over these last few years, especially with the help of our cantor, as it's become a popular song in our prayers. The words, Va'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham, that here we have, make me a sanctuary that I, God, may dwell among you, is what the translation is. Here's the invention of the sanctuary in Torah. And especially during COVID, as sanctuaries moved into our homes, we started talking about the ways that we make our own individual sanctuaries. Just 2 verses later, which we'll also read tonight, God tells Moses to have the people make an ark of acacia wood to hold the 10 Commandments and later the Torah. In the very next verse after that, we read that that ark is to be covered, Zahav Tahor Mibait Mechutz, that it's to be covered entirely in pure gold, inside and out, and often the interpretation of that is taken a little mystically, but to say that when you come into the tabernacle, as it was called, that you are able to be made pure in both the spiritual sense, but also they believed very much so in the Torah in the physical sense. I'm working with some B'nai Mitzvah students right now who have Torah portions in about a month, all about some really nasty stuff that our bodies can do that teenagers don't love to talk about. But the idea is that you could go into this special place and that the priest could put some special oil on you and all of a sudden you're pure again. You can be healed. And so in some ways, just in 4 verses, the Torah tells us that the sanctuary has 3 different purposes. It was the place that could bring God down onto earth, what I call the holy elevator. It was the place where we keep our most sacred things, like a safety deposit box. And it was a holy hospital, a place where when we feel that we're sick, we can go and magically be healed by whatever they have in all these little special boxes and spices that were held there. In the centuries that follow, the portable sanctuary becomes permanent. It becomes a huge grand palace, what we now call the temple in Jerusalem. It held thousands of people, big parties. People would travel thousands of miles to be there. It no longer moved with the people, it became stable. Not so long after that, it's torn down, not once but twice, and new sanctuaries arise, mostly small sanctuaries at the entrance to every Jewish community. And they served as courthouses and meeting places. They had benches around the outer walls so that people could see each other. Many of them had a mikveh, not in the middle, but on the outside, so that you could find purity not in the middle of the sanctuary, but rather before you entered. The purpose of the sanctuary and the then named synagogue changes constantly. Fast forward to Europe, synagogues begin to have vaulted ceilings because the idea of the bima was created. The bima was a raised space in the middle of the sanctuary that I'm standing on now, but it didn't look like this. It had this, if you've been in especially the historic European synagogues, it looked like what I describe as sort of a bird cage. This very ornate structure in the very center of the sanctuary that reached up high, and so a ceiling like this wouldn't work. So they started to vault the ceilings in Europe to fit the bima and to have this elevated place in the middle of the sanctuary. In America, if you go to our oldest synagogues, you'll see some of the most beautiful and ornate sanctuaries built to mimic the great architecture of the Ottoman Empire, the great cathedrals of Europe, some of the most amazing American buildings in Washington, D.C. They were built to show that our synagogue was also a sign of our equality among those who share this country with us, that we were fully American, that we were able to have as big a synagogue, as beautiful a synagogue as any Catholic or Protestant. Probably weren't thinking about Muslims yet, but we would say that today. And most recently, as is in the case in our building, we lowered the bima as a nod to our value of equality, that no one, not even the rabbi or the cantor, really stands that much higher than anyone else. And in the last 70 years, we began to build our buildings to look like, or to even have, Jerusalem stone, so that we could say that when we're here, we're also connected to Israel, making it a bridge in many ways. This is all to say that the synagogue has always been central to the Jewish people. The synagogue will always be central to the Jewish people, so long as the synagogue continues to adapt to the people that it serves. When we were immigrants in America, we needed an anchor, a place that grounded us and felt like the homes that we left. So the synagogue drew us in. As Telushkin said, it became our center of gravity. When Israel replaced Europe as the world's Jewish center, our synagogues became a bridge to the Zionist dream. When I was in college and decided to become a rabbi, I knew that the synagogue had to be my focal point, and despite the trend of just about every other college student my age, I started teaching religious school at Wise Temple in Cincinnati. And I interned with rabbis every chance I got over the summer, while my wife, on the other hand, who had no interest in being a rabbi, and at the time, despite my efforts in dating a future rabbi, she decided to travel like many college students do. And a story I've probably told before that she often recalls from her semester abroad. One of her fondest memories wasn't a place that she went or some amazing experience that she had. It was standing in the train station in Luxembourg where she lived, where they would go every Friday, and they'd look up at the train schedule, and they'd pick a place off the board to go for the weekend. And they would just see whichever train was leaving at the right time or was on sale that weekend, and they would pick a destination, and that would be their adventure for the weekend. Ironically, as I think about where the synagogue is today, in some ways that may have been as good an experience as any course I took in rabbinical school or certainly any internship I had in college. Synagogue today is a lot like a train station. It is still a source of gravity that pulls us toward the familiar. I know many of us feel that way, that we come to the synagogue because it grounds us, in our Judaism particularly. It's still a sacred safety deposit box. This is where we keep all of our sacred Jewish objects, but it's also where we house our Jewish moments that are so special for us, where our kids in kindergarten walk up onto this bima so that we can mark their beginning of their Jewish education as a holy, sacred moment, and it's where we have life cycle events that go all the way through death and mourning, that we specifically ask, even the most secular among us, ask to be in this space. So it still pulls at us. It still continues, I think, to be a microcosm of the great temple, because, especially in American synagogues, we all have social halls. We have spaces where we want to gather and eat and celebrate, and where we come to have wedding parties and bar mitzvah parties and the Oneg Shabbat, and times for us to leave our homes and come and be in the midst of a huge number of people, a great gathering, but it's also something different now. What I see in the synagogue that we have today is a place where people come from all different directions, some Jewish, some not, some with a lot of knowledge of Judaism and some with none at all, some just traveling along with others because they married someone who's Jewish, or sometimes they just talked to somebody who was Jewish at work one day and they decided to show up here. But all of them are looking to go on some sort of a journey. All of them with an expectation that something that starts here is going to take them somewhere else, and that is going to be a special journey, a better journey, because it started here. The expectations now are much higher. In my mind, the synagogue may no longer be the center of gravity that it was. But if you play with the metaphor, gravity is something that was out of our control. It's simply a part of nature. It weighs us down also. I can see that being the synagogue of my grandparents, a synagogue that they felt they had to go to whether they liked to or not, a synagogue that was a part of them just like their family name was a part of them. And it anchored them. That was where they found their friends. That was where they celebrated their life. Today, the synagogue is perhaps more of a platform where we launch into adulthood with an eye toward who we want to be when we are 13. We listen to our kids' speeches at their B'nai Mitzvah, or we will in a few weeks at our confirmation service as I've started working with our seniors in high school. And they'll talk about the high expectations they have for their Judaism, the way that their Judaism is a part of their journey going forward. But not necessarily that they have to find a synagogue in every place that they live. But I believe that they won't forget the synagogue from where their journey began. We've seen rituals around life cycles become varied and creative, something that my grandparents never would have imagined. 7 nights of Shiva is rare, and interfaith marriage is an accepted norm. Boundaries are easily broken, and yet couples continue to stand on this Jewish platform and ask for help in choosing the path to take. Spouses continue to come to this place looking for guidance in the unknown path of mourning. And so synagogues are a place where people come from all directions and a place that has a lot of direction to give. Our job is to do our best, despite security concerns and despite a world that perhaps we fear does not welcome us, to keep our doors open, to find a way to bring in as many people into this station as possible, not because we seek higher numbers, but because we believe that we have something to offer in whatever journey they have ahead of them. So I have no doubt that we'll continue to be as busy as ever, doing the work we've always done, serving a sacred purpose. As this week we celebrate the creation of the first sanctuary, and we look forward to the many things that will happen in this sanctuary, the many ways it'll impact our life, the holy journey it sends us out to explore, and I hope the excitement that we experience when we realize how much it's given to us and how much it'll give to generations to come. Shabbat Shalom. We'll turn